Good morning. It's Thursday, the 16th of April. Easter was now 5 days ago. Easter counts as the first day, so Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, day 5 out of the 40 days that the disciples were with Jesus. And according to Luke, that took place partly in the upper room, at the place where they'd had Passover before the crucifixion in Jerusalem. In the Gospel of John, we hear that Jesus is going to appear both Easter evening in that upper room and then a week later, and we're going to hear about Thomas, who wasn't there on Easter, this coming Sunday. In Matthew, the Gospel we read last Sunday on Easter, says Jesus was going to meet them in Galilee. And in fact, we do have the story of Jesus talking with them on the road to Galilee. The road to Emmaus story will be coming up during this Easter season. 2 days ago, as you recall, I had on a shirt and then I wore it again yesterday, meaning to talk about it. It was a shirt that I bought while I was in India. And I have wonderful memories of India. India was intense. There's no other way to describe a Lutheran communications center. They would translate the Bible and broadcast Bible programs, coordinate relief efforts, and the building was very damaged during the tsunami back in the 2004, 2005. So we were there in 2008. Boy, it's been a few years now, but we have a box. We call it our India box. We open it up and it has fabric, it has spices, it has incense, it has various kinds of things that we remember from there, but we cannot open that box without smelling India, the rich mix of smells. Where we were in southern India, the food was so hot from tela cherry pepper, ground black pepper, which was in everything, including the bread. And that's why I wore that shirt, was to talk about bread. As you recall yesterday, if you tuned in, I looked at Matthew 6, when Jesus taught them how to pray. Give us today our daily bread. And we talked about what it's like to go and get bread or to have bread and to find that there's no flour of any kind in Safeway. So that a lot of people are apparently learning how to make bread or relearning how to make bread. My goodness, yesterday I made crackers with sourdough starter. You have to throw away half of it and feed it, and so instead of taking the discard and pouring it down the drain, I made crackers out of it, and they're delicious. Tarragon and sea salt sourdough crackers. I made pizza dough. Sue made a cake. So we're making bread. We do a lot of bread baking anyway, and it probably shows. Where does bread come? But the reason I wanted to talk about India, then the Indian shirt reminded me, because we learned that there are so many varieties to bread that when you mention the word bread, we hear the word bread. Jesus says, give them our daily bread. And today I want to look at John chapter 6, the feeding of the 5,000. Bread, what is bread? Well, in India there were two kinds of bread. One, actually there's really three. They have chapati, they have naan, and they have dosa. And chapati and naan are breads that are made with wheat dough and flour, and they may have natural yeasts with them, yogurt in the case of the naan. And these are generally baked in little clay ovens called tandoors, or fried on a hot, probably a hot cast iron or rock surface. And then they can just be flipped over. They're fry bread. If you've ever eaten at the Yakima reservation in Toppenish at the restaurant there, they make an Indian fry bread that's very delicious. And it is not a baked bread, it's simply fried. But the dosa was the most interesting. It's a batter bread. And they take a large, maybe a 15 to 20 inch piece of round hot cast iron, usually have a fire under it, and they'll put a little layer of oil on there, and they will take this batter and pour the batter on there. And then it's just paper thin. It takes a matter of seconds for it to cook on the one side, and then it has to be carefully pried off. And then You take that, take a piece of it, and then you would dip it in any number of bowls, and that would be a meal, dipping this rolled up, very soft, battered bread, like a very thin crepe, and then dipping it into maybe lentils or maybe a sauce that had yogurt, or maybe sauces that were very spicy, or a coconut. Amazing flavors, amazing taste sensations. What is bread like for you these days? John chapter 6. Since this is supposed to have something to do with the Bible, after all, I didn't introduce myself. Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, Grandview, Washington. There, with that out of the way now, I can go into the scriptures. Chapter 6, beginning with verse 5. Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him. He said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked him this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 fish. How far will they go among so many?" So we have the word bread and we have the word loaves. Jesus is saying they need bread. Remember P.T. Barnum, bread and circuses. People like food in their belly and they like entertainment. Marie Antoinette, "The people have no bread, Your Majesty. Let them eat cake." Her fatal last 4 words. They had no cake either, obviously. Bread. What are you doing for bread these days? And how are you giving thanks for the bread that you have? It's really interesting when you look at the origin of foods. So many of the foods that are common, not just here, but even around the world, originated in the Americas. Most of the peppers that we have, most of the berries, most of the squash, potatoes, corn, these 2 basic starches, they're popular around the world. When we were in South Africa visiting our daughter a few years ago while she was in the Peace Corps, it was interesting to see the staple of most of the people in what they called the resettlement villages that occurred during apartheid to get the African people, the black people, out of the city so they weren't competing for jobs. They were on public subsistence, very poor, no infrastructure whatsoever, and the government would supply them with water and ground up corn meal to make what they called pap. That was the staple of their diet, pap. Taking the cornmeal, mixing it with water, and putting it in a cast iron pot over a fire in the backyard. That was a daily routine. We got to watch it. Sue got to stir it while we were there, and Jillian got to the point where she couldn't even stand to look at anything made with corn. She also learned how to hate chicken feet because that's about the only meat that was affordable for the people in those villages. The parts that the people in the cities would throw out, and that became part of their diet just so they could survive. They understood daily bread in the form of not particularly nutritious ground up corn and water. We need more than bread, obviously. We need a full diet of proteins and vegetables, fruits. We need dairy products. Actually, there are some who would say we don't need dairy products at all, but we need the things they give us. And we live in the valley where they make a lot of dairy products. And so I'm going to say real butter, not margarine, milk, cheese, yogurt, cottage cheese, ice cream. These are part of our diet. But we may not be getting what we're used to these days. We don't know when society is going to, as they call it, reopen. When we'll be able to then gather again in perhaps groups of 5 or 10. When we'll be able to go out and not wear a mask. It's possible that wearing a mask when we go out will become the new norm for a long time to come until we have a vaccine. And the one thing we know about viruses, they do tend to mutate into cousins. There are lots of flus. We heard about the H1N1 because it ended up being kind of a nasty little one. But there's H2N3 and so on, all different combinations of the seasonal flu. They come around, and that's why there's an annual vaccine. And generally they then guess which one of those to vaccinate against. And the vaccine's apparently about 25% efficacious or effective. So we're going to have to figure out long-term strategies in managing COVID-19 because it's going to become COVID-21. Nature has its way of doing it. Nature produces these things, and nature will continue to produce them. And we will always be reacting to nature, lagging behind. And it's going to force changes on us. Changes in the way we shop for our daily bread, maybe changes in the kind of bread we eat. Some around here would take their corn and daily make their corn tortillas out of corn flour. I've gone to so many homes when I was a hospice chaplain where the first thing, if it was a Spanish-speaking family, they would always offer, just without exception, offer a fresh made, or as they call it, hecho a mano, made by hand, corn tortilla. And it was their way of saying, please accept our hospitality, and then we'll allow you to come and minister with us. And those are the kinds of things, at the time I would say, oh, of course, and I would have one. Because it was not polite to refuse, because it may come off as saying, well, I'm better than you and I'm not going to eat your food. Today, it's a whole different thing. We have to be careful what other people offer us and what we offer to others. And that's too bad, because this COVID is going to interfere with a lot of social things, a lot of politeness. Well, that's the word for today. I'll see you tomorrow.